So guys, good news. Ryan Grimm was able to join me and actually made it to the studio. So also got to check in and make sure things are looking good there. Ryan, how is it out there?
Everything is here. Nothing was stolen over the break. So I haven't done a full inventory, but I think we're pretty good.
All right, good to know.
The books are all here. The baseballs, yeah, we're set.
Excellent. So I wanted Ryan to join us for this story, which is really interesting. So Elon Musk, not content with effectively buying the U.S. government and getting to operate it towards his ends, not content with jumping in also to the German political system and backing the AfD and writing an op-ed and trying to really, put his imprint on that government, has also now jumped massively into UK politics. And all of this also comes at an interesting time because he had gotten very much crosswise with the sort of MAGA faithful on this H-1B issue. So I think that's highly relevant to his choice of, jumping headfirst into UK politics. So let me just read a little bit of this Axios report and then get some of Ryan's reaction here. So it says, Musk rocks UK politics with attacks on the prime minister and support for the far right. So you guys might recall relatively recently, actually, Keir Starmer, who's the head of Labour Party, he is the new prime minister. The UK, disgusted with the Tories, really kicked them out, was not so much a sort of endorsement of Keir Starmer or Labour, but a rejection of their opponents. In any case, Keir Starmer is the current prime minister. Elon Musk hijacked British politics this week with a stream of at least 60 posts on Twitter since Tuesday, attacking Prime Minister Keir Starmer, defending an anti-Islam campaigner, that would be Tommy Robinson, and endorsing the far-right Reform Party. Why it matters, they say the right-hand man to America's next president, has gone after the leaders of several of its closest allies in recent months, but his fight with the British government is turning into the nastiest yet. While Musk's X microphone was enough to send Westminster into a frenzy, there's been intense speculation he'll also open his checkbook for reform, and its Trump-aligned leader Nigel Farage. Musk told Axios' Mike Allen he had yet to donate, wasn't sure if it would be legal. Musk labeled Keir Starmer Keir Stormtrooper, shared a meme claiming the PM was more concerned about policing social media than about rape. That was part of a barrage of tweets attacking British political and legal establishment for failing to adequately investigate alleged child sex abuse rings, one most famously in the town of Rochdale, in which dozens of young girls were raped between 2004 to 2013. So just to sort of TLDR this, there's a few things going on here. First of all, Musk posing Labor, for his own ideological interests. That's one thing. The other thing is what they're really using as a cudgel against Starmer is this decades-old, truly horrifying, massive scandal where there were huge numbers of what they called grooming gangs, raping young girls. And for a combination of a lot of social factors, but one of them being most of the men who were involved in these grooming gangs who were raping these young girls, most of them were of Pakistani origin. And there was the sense of like, oh, we have to be culturally sensitive, which of course the right seized on. And there was also a sense from police of like, oh, well, these girls, they're really sort of asking for it. They didn't see them so much as victims, which was another piece of this. In any case, this is a decades old story. Keir Starmer was tangentially involved in the story at the time. And so that's the big thing that they're using right now as the cudgel against him. So Ryan, your thoughts on kind of this overall story and what Musk is up to here?
So you're right. There are a couple things going on here. One is that this was a horrific scandal. It's also one that was investigated, pretty seriously over the last couple of decades. In 2014, Alexis J produced a report that shocked the world. It made mainstream news across the globe, including, I think there were like half a dozen or a dozen stories in the New York Times about this scandal. That led to additional calls for inquiries, which Alexis J also led, and others led. There was a national report that she put out in 2022 that laid out a bunch of recommendations in order to make it so you would have practices in place that would protect victims, that wouldn't allow them to be overlooked, that wouldn't allow these cultural concerns to get in the way of breaking up these gangs. She has said what she is frustrated about is that the conservative government that was in place at the time, has not implemented those fast enough. But the other thing that's going on that I think on a kind of meta level is even more interesting is that throughout the first Trump administration, you had resistance liberals. Every time something kind of new came up, they thought it was a distraction from the thing that they ought to be paying attention to. You remember all that discourse during the first Trump term? It's a distraction, stay focused. The elements of MAGA do the exact same thing. If you remember, over the last 4 years, you would even have major storms described as psyops. Now, this is a psyop. They don't want you focusing on the real thing, whatever it's
Hunter Biden's laptop or whatever.
Hunter Biden's laptop or whatever. They want you focusing on this hurricane or on this other event. Like actual news events that were occurring were being described as psyops to distract the public. This one literally is that. It is a concerted effort to manufacture a news event where there really isn't one. Should the recommendations of the Jay report from 2022 be implemented by the Labor government now that the conservative government didn't implement them? Yes, sure, they should.
Yeah.
But the idea that all of a sudden there should be this global attention focused on this is very suspicious. Like, why all of a sudden do they want to talk about this? And your point, I think, is the obvious one. There was this gigantic H-1B civil war going on, which was bloodying up the MAGA coalition and not going particularly well for Musk, even though he was, he had the power to win it.
Right.
It was kind of ripping the coalition apart.
Right.
First, you get this kind of Adrian Dittman nonsense for like a day or so, and then it goes over to here. People in South Asia who are watching this are like, this sounds like something that India got, asked Elon to kind of gin up because it's all about Pakistanis in the UK. Maybe he got the idea from them. Who knows? But somehow somebody had the idea of like, what we need to really talk about is these gang raping Pakistanis in the UK to get the band back together, get everybody agreeing after we had this difficult debate over H-1B. And to me it's an incredible example of, and here we are talking about it.
Right.
Like on our show.
Well, because he's
which
consequential.
isn't even Twitter. Yeah.
Right. Because listen,
exactly.
When the richest man in the world gets involved, the UK right now is debating, they have better limits on money in politics than we do. But they're debating putting additional caps on contributions to deal specifically with Elon Musk, and to avoid, having the same fate befall them as to learn some of the lessons of what we're seeing here. Musk put in $250 million to Trump's campaign and now has tremendous power over our federal government. And so they're seeing that and saying, maybe we need to learn something from that. And, I think your point is a really apt one, because also the choice of issue. And again, I don't want to diminish that this is a horrifying story. I remember reading about it back in 2014, the number of girls affected, the fact that there were so few prosecutions. In fact, in a few instances, it was these girls, young girls, I'm talking as young as 11, who were, a few of them prosecuted themselves as like sex workers or for disorderly conduct. Absolutely abhorrent and insane. But it also has a lot of echoes with the way that immigration restrictionists in the U.S. will use legitimate, accurate, undocumented immigrant crimes to paint a portrait of an entire migrant community as criminal, even as we know the overall statistics are that both documented and undocumented immigrants are more law-abiding than U.S. citizens. And there's actually a similar dynamic here in the UK. You and I both looked up the statistics. You actually have white Britons who are more overrepresented in terms of prosecutions for child sex abuse than Asians or South Asians. So it's also an attempt to paint a deceptive story that this is the source of all child sex abuse, to paint an entire community in this way. And for him to get back in good of like, see, I do actually hate immigrants and whole H-1B thing, like, let's just put that to the side. I also have antipathy towards brown migrants that come into countries. The interesting thing here is he's also taken the side of this dude that I don't even know if he would object to being called an Islamophobe, Tommy Robinson, who's like this, originally like soccer hooligan, criminal. He's been in prison for any number of things. Currently, he's in prison because he lied about this 15-year-old Syrian migrant who a video had gone viral of this kid getting beaten up and like sort of fake waterboarded, this like simulation of torture at his school. And Robinson jumps in to say, oh, well, this kid isn't so innocent, and to try to link him to these sort of grooming and sexual assault allegations. Totally unfounded, completely libelous, found to be so, required by the courts to stop doing it. And keeping in mind, the UK does not have free speech protections in the same way that we would. But I think even here, this would have been potentially a legal issue. He continues, puts on a film, reiterating the same libelous claims. And the court issues an injunction. He actually, admits to being in contempt of court. That's what he gets thrown in prison for. So Musk has also taken up the cause of this guy, Tommy Robinson. Here's, one of the things that he posted. Why is Tommy Robinson in solitary confinement prison, which he is, by the way. He's isolated for reportedly his own safety, for telling the truth. He should be freed, and those who covered up this travesty should take his place in that cell. I mean, every part of that is just basically like false and fictional. But part of what's interesting here is Nigel Farage, the head of the like right-wing Reform Party, and Musk is now backing the Reform Party. Farage has long distanced himself and condemned Tommy Robinson. Mm-hmm. Like, this is too far even for him. And so that's now created this other rift between Musk and Farage. And Musk is now coming out and saying, I don't know if Nigel Farage, effectively because he's not on board with Tommy Robinson, this like thug anti-Muslim hooligan, I don't know that he's the right leader for reform. So he's jumped in with that one as well.
Right. And I almost feel bad for the people who are kind of earnestly, following Musk's version of this, because if that's all you're following, and he keeps repeating to his audience, do not read the mainstream press. Do not read any news other than what you get on X. The only way to stay informed is to, listen to what I say and listen to what I elevate here on X. And if that's what you listen to, then you actually do think that this guy, Tommy Robinson, stood up for these rape victims and exposed this scandal of these grooming gangs and the entire establishment, which is, some linkage between Epstein and QAnon, was supportive of these underground, gangs. And so therefore they locked the whistleblower, truth teller, Tommy Robinson up. And if that's what you think and that's what you've been told, then of course, free him. That's what a travesty. What an outrage. If you actually look at what happened, like you said, he made a very specific allegation against a very specific person.
By the way.
The child. The court found that to be false, ordered him to stop saying that false thing, at which point he could have just moved on and said other false things about other people. But he insisted on continuing to defame and libel this child and destroying this kid's life and committing contempt of court. And so then he winds up. Now, then you could debate how a society ought to handle something like that.
Is an 18-month prison sentence too long? Okay, we could have that discussion.
Right. But in the U.S., it would probably mostly just be monetary penalties, although at some point, if there's continuous contempt of court and its rulings, like even in civil cases, you do then, as we're going to talk to Stephen Donziger, who spent a significant amount of time because of these contempt, specifically because of contempt of court. But it's just, so I'm increasingly curious to see where this goes, because if Musk is really going to treat Twitter, X, I'm now willing to call it X because it is really radically different than it used to be, as a weapon in his culture war, which is a political war, which is a war for his own commercial interests. If he's going to continue using it as a weapon for regime change around the world, how are other governments going to respond? Because there are rules about what foreign interference in domestic politics. Georgia, for instance, just banned foreign interference in its politics, and the U.S. Freaked out because they said, now all of our NGOs are going to be illegal now. We have our FARA registration rules. Other countries have that. You're hearing now in Europe calls that they just need to shut Twitter down, which would be unfortunate because that would be an attack. what it was a place where people could express themselves, and it's still a way to reach an international audience. But if he is just going to use it as this weapon, I think governments aren't really going to tolerate that. But maybe they don't have enough power to stop him.
Well, I think we do have one example, which is in Brazil. There was a sort of, game of chicken or clashing of titans between the Brazilian government, the Brazilian court system, and Musk and Twitter. And ultimately, the Brazilian court system sort of held strong, and Musk ultimately backed down and did what they wanted him to do. So you do, without getting into all the specifics, because I don't even remember all the specifics of what that particular example was about, but you do have this one example of a country saying, like, no, we have our laws, you have to abide by them, or you don't get to play in the sandbox. And Brazil has it's a very large country and has a large number of users on that platform. So that was specific. The last piece that I think is interesting here too is Owen Jones had shared this, and I actually wasn't really aware of this, but Elon Musk, at least according to the polling, is really unpopular with the British public. We're talking about 64% unfavorable, only 18% favorable. So, here in the US, we just have this instinct to like venerate billionaires and he made these great companies and whatever, and we just like have this knee-jerk reaction that people have to kind of be pulled back from, but in with the British public, they have a lot of antipathy towards him already, which is part of why I think Nigel Farage felt comfortable, even though he would love to get Elon Musk's money and Elon Musk's support, etc., why he felt comfortable immediately coming out and saying, no, I don't support Tommy Robinson. I've long distanced myself from him, and I'm not going to change that principle on behalf of Elon Musk or anyone else.
One thing I would add also, for whatever it's worth, solitary confinement is torture, and I don't think anybody who's in prison, including Tommy Robinson, should be subjected to solitary confinement. But you're right; it'll be interesting to see, how much if he has as much pull here as he does elsewhere. Europe is in general a pretty weak place right now. They rely on him for Starlink for the Ukrainians, he's got that leverage over them. Starlink more broadly gives him leverage. His relationship with Trump gives him leverage. So whether they'll actually pull the trigger, but you have seen a number of politicians throughout Europe saying, we need to nip this in the bud and we need to just ban Twitter. But then, you can have VPNs and get around it.
Sure, but that does.
He could also
limit
just
the
not
reach.
use it as a weapon for his own political ends. What
and
if
the
he
other
just kept it as a free speech?
The other thing you took note of immediately is he tweeted out this thing of like, we're going to change the algorithm to focus on happy stuff, and it's like
grooming gangs. Yeah,
right, like grooming gangs. But also, now that your guy's in the White House, suddenly you're going to focus on, everything's actually great, and the U.S. is a wonderful place. Isn't that convenient? That timing.
It's so dystopian. Yes. Now we're coming into office. Enough of all this complaining. Let's think and share happy thoughts. Let's be positive,
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Except for my campaigns that I'm going to launch around whatever I decide is interesting at the moment.
Correct. Yeah, and this is why. Listen, he's such an important figure to follow, whether you want to or not, because of the amount of power that he wields through a combination of his wealth, his proximity to power, his official, position in the Trump administration, and then his willingness to use X as this weapon. So we'll continue to follow where this goes next, because it could be very interesting.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.